I did the 16 through 30 for this, the English test. All right, you ready? Number 16 is G. 17 is C. 18 is F. 19 is C. G, C, F, C. All right, 20 is G. 21 is D. 22 is G. 23 is C. 24 is H. 25 is B. 26 is F. 27 is C. 28 is F. 29 is D. And 30 is G.
Yes.
Woo. I saw you doing this and I was like, oh no, and then I noticed they were check marks. It's like you got literally every single one wrong. Yes. Which one did you get wrong? And I was like, it's lines. 20. Okay. Wait, 1 second. Let's talk about the ones you want to talk about. So we have a request for 20. What was your question about that?
Well, because I just thought it was H, because isn't it like where the apostrophe goes in it? Isn't that like someone's or specific conjunction?
This is how we do apostrophe. If it's multiple years, the apostrophe goes after the S. And if it's only 1 year, it goes before the S. So more than a year's worth of 8-hour days. Yeah.
Like my friends versus
Whitney's house versus, my friend's house. That means that this is just my house, right? This means I've got multiple friends living in that house that all own that house together. Yeah.
Cool.
And then than versus then is another one you'd have to know for that question. Then, Ian, is about time. And then, an, is about comparison. So in that one, more than a year's worth of 8-hour days, it's talking about this whole year's worth. It's this section of time. Okay, what other ones do you want to talk about? Okay.
Why do you use dashes on 17?
Okay, 17 is tricky. Here's the reason that 17 is C. It's not because of the dashes. Because in 17, in the original, you can set that aside with commas and that's fine. But it's that comma after staff that is the problem. And so the only one where we don't have that comma, like where it could be correct, is C.
I thought it was the dashes because the comma.
Oh, I did not look at that.
That's like, it looks a little ugly, but it'd be okay.
That's my bad.
So you could do just the comments on the.
Yep, if you just took out the comma after staff, then it would be right.
So I feel
So
like
I should
I'm
convert it.
validating that one, because I just didn't read it, so like.
Okay. Yeah, and there's another on the next one that you're gonna take. There's a little hidden comma at the end of one, so just be really on the lookout for commas. I feel like they're trying to trick you with commas sometimes.
Commas are the worst part.
Yeah. Are there any others you want to go over?
But I mean, I just read it, like, why would-
No? Okay. A lot of them are vocab questions on this one. There are a couple where the shortest is the right answer. There are a couple where you're looking for redundancy. Cut out that redundancy, right?
Yeah.
All right, should we do the next one?
Wait,
Okay,
wait, wait,
this is the
wait.
last one
We
we're gonna
should have
do.
like a 3-minute break.
Isn't that a 3-minute break?
How about a 5-second break?
Ooh, I like it. Really shake things up.
There we go. You're good. Okay, so for this one, you just go to the very end. Another 9 minutes. Ready? Go. All right, 31. We there?
Yeah.
Okay, C.
Wait, am I here?
31 C. 32 J. 33 C. we're gonna talk about 32. 34, G. 35A.
Okay, yes.
36, J. 37, C. 38, F. 39, D. 40, H. 41, B. 42, F. 43, C. 44, G. 45A.
Okay, so I got one wrong. I missed one.
That's not bad. This one's a little bit, I think, more difficult than the other ones.
Wait, is this our last one?
This is our last one today.
Are we gonna like this section? This easily practice? We'll have a secret.
Yeah, I think we'll do the last one on Friday.
Because I've had a
Oh,
so
really? That's
I'm trying to
amazing.
conserve.
All right, if you haven't already, talk with your group about the ones that you missed. Now is your chance, if you've got it right, to teach the person how, why it's right.
I was actually thinking, I was like, yeah, I don't really like more time. And then I was like, I would have done that. I forgot. That was my bad. I didn't like it. I was like, dude, this was gross. And then it's over 39. And 32. Yeah, okay, that makes sense. Because then becomes less, but I was like, I changed. I did that on the second.
And after this, you're gonna need your Chromebooks, so might as well get those out now. Get them booted up. A Chromebook? I don't, but you can remember the library tomorrow. Because you'll need it today. Okay, I want to talk about 32 because I heard a bunch of people go, what? There are two ways to punctuate this part of the sentence.
Yeah.
One, you could say that some of this information is non-essential. You could say sand heated by a lightning blast
Yeah, that was an option.
melts and becomes glass, right? But that's not an option. Instead, all of the options have a comma after melt. Can someone tell me why we can't have a comma there, Kaylee? Exactly. Okay, so we've got the sand that is becoming, and we don't want to separate the subject from what it is doing. And it's doing two things here. It is both melting and becoming. And so you do not want to have a comma there. And I know sometimes we just look for these fanboy words and we just stick commas by them because we know that fanboys means commas, right? But the only time fanboys means commas is if we have a second subject and we don't have a second subject. So we don't want to divide the subject from the verbs. Okay, are there any others that you want to go over now that you've talked with each other? Well, awesome. We're gonna ace the ACT then. I think we'll just do one more on Friday and then be done. I like them. Yeah, it's nice to have solid answers.
Yeah, it's like, I feel.
Okay, everybody get onto Canvas. And you're going to find the assignment just called, it's just a page actually. It's called Sources for March 2nd and 3rd. It's on our module for today. Yeah.
When is the next, when is the synthesis essay due?
Where's my, I feel like American Dream Synthesis is our next one. It's not due for a couple weeks.
I did it like one. My schedule was so bad. It's so like shooting my canvas paper with this. What is that?
Yeah, they should like.
Do it.
Yeah, March 15th is our next lesson.
Okay, that's not bad.
So you get breathing room, you get 2 days of no homework,
Wow.
a whole week of no homework. Awesome. Okay, how many of you guys are on that Canvas assignment now? Sources for March 2nd and 3rd. I'd give you a minute or so to get there.
Wall needs to freaking,
We just read it to the test.
can we should tell Wall?
Yeah, I got 103. Yeah.
You were down bad.
I didn't do that. I just got 100.
Okay, and I want you to click on the second. Click on the second link. The second link that says why the media is so polarized, polarized, and how it polarizes us.
Why when I scroll down, it scrolls me back up? I really like to kill brokers. Wait, sorry.
Why the media is so polarized.
Oh, today.
Did we find it? It's the second link on that Canvas page. Okay, so let's tie this in now. Last class, we looked at sources. We looked at sources from the Deseret News and the Salt Lake Tribune, and we put them up here on the board in the different ways that they were maybe revealing some of their bias. I wish that we hadn't got cut off, but let's talk for a second about different ways that we remember from last time, or that you can just think of that sources reveal their bias. I'm going to say number one is word choice. I think, so there was an article that I read today in 2 different papers where one said that Mike Lee said that Joe Biden is losing it. He uses the phrase losing it. And the other article said Mike Lee accused Joe Biden of losing it. And to me, it's a tiny difference, said versus accused, but it is different, right? And so one of them, it shows that like Mike Lee is being kind of like vehement, like he's being kind of angry in his accusation, and the other one said is more neutral. So there's ways that just the word choice itself reveals a little bit of bias. What are some other things that reveal bias?
So
Josie?
you can look at the content, like what they have really focused on. So certain, someone else might focus on the negative, or someone else will focus on the positive. So even if they don't use certain word choice like that, they'll like highlight like good things or bad things about.
Good. Highlighted, highlighted. Yeah, so in our article about the budget, the Salt Lake Tribune was highlighting this idea of transparency way more than the Deseret News. The Salt Lake Tribune kept saying things like, nobody knows what this budget is like. Nobody knows where this money is going. They won't tell us the answers if they're not being transparent, right? Deseret News doesn't like contradict that. They don't say, and they're being very transparent. They just choose not to highlight that information. Yeah.
I was gonna say like, I guess kind of what you said, but basically also like, versus the length spent on each topic. I think just completely omitting some topics we speak about in total also can like, is more biased.
Totally. I see that so much in documentary films, right? So like even the most fly on the wall kind of objective documentary filmmaking, we have this view of it being like completely true, because how could they lie? They're just filming what is in front of them, right? But in the editing process, they get to take out certain information and they get to focus the camera on certain things, right? So this idea of omitting some info, kind of editing out some info, can create that sense of bias. Anything else that you notice in media sources that might reveal bias? Okay, what do you mean by that? Yeah. Yeah, I'm gonna say titles and adjectives. I noticed that in the same article I was reading today, that one of them referred to Joe Biden and one of them referred to President Biden. And it definitely gives a different tone. Like when students just call out Bora, versus Dr. Bora. Yeah, Haley.
Anyways.
Sorry. It's okay. Okay. Order is so important. Yeah, the Salt Lake Tribune article started, if I'm not mistaken, it started with the idea of transparency, and gave a lot of space at the beginning to the idea of public education before they moved on to the next point. So the order of ideas is gonna be really important. Yeah.
Sometimes like sources and references can show because if someone has a ton of like sources that are credible
Yeah.
and like if you actually check them, that says a lot about if it's just like them bias or if it's like the actual facts. So sometimes that helps. If they don't like have any sources, it's kind of like, oh, maybe this is more of like
Absolutely. And when they use the sources, you can kind of see how they're using them too. The words surrounding the source, whether they put the information in quotation marks or not. Sometimes it seems like really clear that they quote somebody in order to critique them, and they don't quote as much. They just sort of absorb certain words in order to accept what the source said. So yeah, the way that they use sources, references, the way that they've done research or not, etc. All right, so we've got a good list going. So last time I think we ended class talking about how it kind of seems like every source is biased though. I don't know. Do you think that it's possible not to have a bias in a media source, like in a news source?
I think it's hard to be like completely educated on something and not form your opinions about it just because you have like so much information coming to you, and just because like you have information, you're educated on it doesn't mean you're right. It just means the way that the like information is presented to you seems like a certain thing in your brain, but another person could perceive it differently. So I think it's kind of hard, especially the more educated you are on it, the more like biased you are because you're perceiving it.
Oh, that's fascinating, because it's like the more education you have on a certain topic, the more outside sources you are bringing to the table when you examine the topic in front of you too. So it's like when I'm reading an essay about the budget, I don't have much education about the budget, but when some sort of representative reads that same article about the budget, they bring all sorts of different education towards that subject, right? And we can say the same thing about the people who write it. Can they provide that context? And that's interesting that the more context they provide, the more in danger they are of presenting a bias. Yeah. What else do you guys think? Bias sources? Yeah.
I would say no. She said that. It made me think of, I was in a class yesterday and we had to read this passage and like analyze it, and I like something stood out to me because of like personal experience and things that I've gone through. And then like afterwards I started looking at it, she's like, I've never seen that in a million years, turning it that way. So I think it's like, even though we can be like, okay, I'm looking at this from both sides, like we are still so affected by the nature of our life that there's like, it's impossible because that's who we are and how we see the world.
Yeah, you cannot see through another person's eyes. It's always going to be through your own paradigm. Yeah.
I just feel like whenever you see the news, there's always going to be some sort of like opinion or idea that's because of these reasons. And right, like the only way this couldn't be biased, I guess, is like almost like it came from the source directly, which obviously isn't like the best way to present people with that information, because if you're just going to give people the bills and just put it on the internet, people aren't going to have like me. I would have no idea how to read it. Like I wouldn't know how to.
Yeah.
Maybe Alistair would, but like I couldn't go through that and decipher all of it. So that's kind of the point of the news.
Yeah.
Is to like take these really big concepts and these really big world problems and present it in a way to people, that they can understand on their own basis. And similar to these two, like, right, it's like all this depends on the culture and what country you're in and all that kind of stuff. So like someone's not gonna really just, oh, this is what's like example like the Ukraine thing, like no one's just gonna be like, this is Ukraine, this is like what the statements have been made. Obviously to like Americans and like other people throughout the world, it's like this is an issue, this needs to stop, and so they're not going to just be like, oh, here's information, this is like, obviously they're going to put a bias in this because it's wrong. We want to help other people understand maybe why it's wrong, and so that's why they use like the news.
Yeah, it's interesting, like even when we say, oh, we just want the facts, we want this unbiased news, we also recognize like we actually don't. We need somebody to contextualize it for us. And even if we just went to the primary sources, then you get the bias of the person who said it in the first place, which there was a lot of criticism around the Iraq war for that same thing, which is like that the media was trying to be unbiased and just present us the facts. And that allowed certain people to control the conversation about it. Yeah, okay.
I think certain stations or news sources also are known for certain topics.
Yeah.
And so since they're known for that, they also have viewers that are politically biased. We have to kind of still do that.
Yeah, I mean, it becomes really complicated when you think of advertising dollars and the way that the news is monetized. Like, we don't have a news source that isn't associated with money in some way, you know? But even like, to go back, like even staying completely neutral is still can be seen as a position. Like, you have to choose what comes first and what comes last in your article. There's no getting around that. Yeah.
Also, staying neutral can be and so if it like seems to be not taking sides, where people can like, oh, you don't care about this issue, oh, you aren't like also this issues people just feel so strong about it, they get mad at people for not like this is right. You can't just say that it's like an in-between thing or something.
Yeah.
This is wrong, you can't be in between about it.
Yeah,
So
I'm
there's penalties no matter what you do.
I'm smiling because that totally reminds me of what happened with Taylor Swift when when they were so mad at her for not saying which political candidate she endorses, right? And by not speaking out and saying whether you endorse Hillary or you endorse Donald or Clinton and Trump. I was trying to stay the same, but it's weird. It's Hillary and Trump, which I have feelings about. But anyway, she was sort of like accused of being immoral for not taking a side, you know?
Yeah, I was just gonna look at the good fact, because I feel like no matter like what you do, if you like don't care about it or if you do care about it, you have a position. Because like if you were to like if someone were to bring up slavery and be like, what's your opinion? And you're like, I'm neutral, like you have a position now, you know, like
Yeah.
it's just like no matter
Yeah,
what,
neutral
like,
is pro.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. Right. So yeah, you can't just stay neutral. And it's interesting we talk about that being a current phenomenon. I wonder if that is the case. Like the fact that our lives are just like so visible, that our opinions are so easily heard by everybody. If that is like puts more pressure on us to always take some kind of firm position. Okay, so then what do we do? Like, what do we do to uncover our own biases, to be aware of it? How do we like make informed decisions if everything is filtered through our own perspective and we can't escape that perspective? Yeah, Josie.
I think you have to constantly be looking at tackle bias opinions, because you're only looking at a certain biased opinion or a certain neutral opinion. That's all the information you see, that's the only side you're gonna see.
Mhm.
So it's most likely best for you to look at like positive, negative, and neutral.
Yeah.
And collect information about, you know, opinions on all sides, and based on that information, based on what you see, the positive sides, negative sides, and the neutral sides, then you can use that information to form your own opinion.
Yeah, okay, good.
Yeah.
Good. So gather more. Like it's like always be aware of these different sides to things and gather that information. Aaliyah, and then to Claire.
I think like what Josie was saying, but also adding to like looking at all the different sides, like from the most radical sides of both ends. Anyways, that came out first, but anyways, and like picking what stays the same. Like if you notice, like you can't talk about a topic and then just have like two totally different. Like there has to be things that are the same, otherwise it's not. You're not.
Yeah, okay, good. So when we were looking at the budget stuff, like noticing what both of them were reporting on in the same way and kind of knowing then what the facts are and being able to distinguish that from the opinions.
I was pretty much gonna say something very similar to that, but I was also just gonna add like kind of what Josie said too. Also like instead of just looking on both ends and looking at the neutral, like I don't know if this counts as neutral, but like go to the primary source too. Because like sometimes I'll look at like articles on both sides and then like I'll watch the actual video of what happened and I'm like neither even like put
Interesting.
in a bunch of this, you know?
Yeah.
So like I think it's important to like look at all three unless
Yeah, I have a story about that. So I went to Virginia for a Bruce Springsteen concert once, and there was a hurricane. And so I'd never been in a hurricane before, but we were paying attention to the news a lot because here we are sitting in the Airbnb in Virginia and we don't know if the concert's going to be canceled or not. So we're reading all these news reports, and all of the news reports have like so many pictures of like crazy damage, like trees toppled over and houses destroyed and like all of this crazy stuff from this weather. But then I looked, and this is sort of the primary source, I look out the window and I don't see any of that, right? Like it's like raining a little. I think people on the East Coast are just kind of soft, and us out here in the West, we really know. We have an earthquake and then we're like back to work. But really, it was fine. There wasn't crazy wind, there wasn't crazy water, and yet they canceled the concert based on, yeah, I know, so sad. It was based on those news reports that just were circulating the extreme information, right? So if you all have access to the real thing, that's great. You don't always have access though. If I were watching those news reports from Utah, I would assume this hurricane was so destructive everywhere. It made me never trust the news again. But yeah, Kaylee.
Kind of along the lines of not trusting the news is like, take everything with a grain of salt. Like, no matter if it's something that you like or something that you don't like, accept that they're probably sensationalizing it
Yeah.
because they want to make money. So like, just that's really
So
critical.
cynical.
That
Yeah,
is
but
cynical,
always be a little
but
suspicious.
being a little bit suspicious of things, particularly things that you automatically want to agree with, is important because, like, if you just accept anything that seems right to you, you're going to have like an even more biased worldview than you started out with.
Yeah,
So like, questioning things is really important,
yeah.
and making sure that you don't just accept things without like thinking of them in a few different ways.
Right. Okay, good. Yeah, Zoe.
You're right. Your conservation kind of reminds me of COVID, like 2020 when it all kind of first started to happen. There was one specific week I remember it, like everything shut down, and it was kind of getting into COVID, but not completely at this time, you know. And it was kind of everything was shutting down because this is shutting down. Like I never knew anyone with COVID, and then like this year, like my friend is in that school, they're like, I have COVID, you know. So now,
Know that everyone has COVID.
yeah, so now that it's like more of an issue, it's less
Yeah.
of an issue for like shutting things down. But just because at the beginning when it was just starting, I don't know what I'm trying to say, but like
Yeah, there's also ways of being suspicious based on how much information you know somebody has, you know? And that doesn't necessarily mean that we're gonna be like, we're gonna reject all of this information because we know that they're fallible. But it's taking that, like Kaylee said, with a grain of salt. But okay, so I want us, we've brought up all these issues and now I kind of want to tear them down a little. So I linked to this article called Why We're Polarized. I don't know why I can't say that. And everybody's there on their Chromebooks, right?
Yeah.
Okay, we're not going to read the whole thing. It's very long. So scroll down to reading the other side doesn't change our minds. Okay, so full disclosure, we're talking about media that has a bias. This guy who wrote this article, his name is Ezra Klein. He's a pretty famous liberal personality. Like he has like he would not be sad about that designation for himself. He writes for the New York Times usually opinion pieces for the New York Times. And he started this website called Vox. So Vox is printing its own founder's little article here, and it comes from his bigger book. So when you're reading about this, you're going to notice that there is a way that it is leaning a little bit left in terms of how it is characterizing people, but it is describing a study that I think is pretty good science, at least from what I can tell. And so we're going to read like what the findings of that study were. So we're just going to read that section. Reading the other side doesn't change our minds. If you finish, you can go on if you find it interesting. How many of you have finished reading that section? Okay, good enough. All right, so we're going to talk about how to incorporate quotations into your writing now. He has this sentence in the, it's like right under the Fox Lies picture, one beautiful picture. He has the sentence that says, in both cases, having contradictory opinions drove partisans not just to a deeper certainty in the rightness of their cause, but to blah, 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 and it keeps going. If I were to use this in a paragraph, I could just quote it. I could just quote the whole thing. That would be okay. I could also just paraphrase it. I could completely put it into my own words, and I could cite it at the end, even if I am paraphrasing it. You would cite it no matter what, but I could just say, when people heard opinions from across the political divide, they just decided that they were even more correct. And then it's completely in my words, and it would be a paraphrase, right? But what I want us to practice and what I want us to do in our synthesis essay is a combination of quoting plus paraphrasing. And here's the reason it's better. When you just quote like this, you're asking your reader to do a lot. You're asking your reader to completely switch their writing voice or their reading voice. And I don't know if you've been like reading a book, like let's say you're really into a novel, you're reading Harry Potter, it's just like going along really quickly, you love it, and then you're like, oh shoot, I got to do my homework for school, I'm going to switch over to my science textbook and I'm going to start reading that. It's so much harder to read the science textbook after you have been reading the kind of pleasant flowing writing of the novel. You know, have you felt that? Or even just switching novels, like switch from J.K. Rowling to F. Scott Fitzgerald, and suddenly Fitzgerald is harder to read just because of that switch. When you have big long quotes like this, you are asking your reader to do that over and over again, to switch between writing voices, and that's hard. So I don't know about you, but when I come along quotes when I'm reading, I usually just skip them. Do you read the quotes when you're reading a paper? I don't know.
How long it is.
Yeah, I usually just skip
If
them.
it's a textbook, no way.
Exactly, because I always expect that a good writer is just going to contextualize it for me anyway. So I won't read it. I'll just wait to see what they have to say. It's very lazy, but that's what I do. So we don't want our readers to be lazy. We want them to force them to read everything that we say. And so instead of using one of these or the other, we combine short quotations, maybe no more than 5 words, in with our paraphrasing. So we say something like, when people were exposed to contradictory opinions, they only gained more certainty. Something like that. I'm going to pull little quotes out of the quotation, and you're wanting to pull things that actually, have some depth or have some importance. Like you probably don't need to quote like in both cases. I don't know. That seems like less important to the quotation. So you're pulling out the words that actually have some weight in the quotation, and you're using these in your sentence to make it flow with the rest of your writing. And then just a little thing. Notice how I cited here at the end. We've talked about citations before, I think, but just to be safe, the period goes after the guy's last name. So down here, I've got no period right there, quotation mark, last name, period. Yeah.
So with like parentheses and periods, if you have like a full sentence basically inside of your parentheses for some reason, would you put a period inside the parentheses?
Oh, you're not talking about citing. You're just talking about that's a real style choice, but never inside. Never inside the parentheses. Okay. There's multiple sentences inside the parentheses.
So if there's only one sentence inside the parentheses,
it goes outside, but it doesn't, depending, it's like a fiction issue. Okay. But depending, the period would either go after the last parenthesis or before the first one. Yeah, that one's tricky. If you had multiple sentences in a parenthesis, you could use a period in there. Yeah. but with citations always after.
Got it.
Yeah, Zoe.
So like way long ago, I was taught to continue the thought with the quote to like, introduce, cite, and then explain. But with how do you do that with the period? Do you continue the thought, or is it just like
Oh, so you, what you're talking about is attributive tags, I think. Tell me if this is right. Where you would say something like Ezra Klein argues, you'd have the quotation, and then you'd say, and then you'd continue your thought after. I mean, you could do that. You can totally do that too. This is just another way of doing it. Yeah. So if I wanted to, I could add in here. Klein, wait. I could say Klein argues that when people were exposed to contradictory opinions, they only gained more certainty. And then if I said his name in my sentence with that attributed tag, I wouldn't need to actually have the citation about his name. That's a different issue than what you were asking, but yeah. Yeah, so if that's like the way that you like to do it is sort of like adding more after the quotation, you definitely can, but you can also do that in separate sentences. Yeah,
Just
just,
quotation we're using have like goes up to a certain point where there's like a period. Do you put that period in the quotations and then do the name and then like your
No.
name, or do you just leave the period out even though like
you leave the period out, you save it for the end. It's almost like you're thinking of this part of the citation being a part of your sentence. Yeah. Okay, I'm gonna make you do this now.
wait?
Dang it, I have to write a sentence.
No, my favorite.
What is
don't
this,
wanna
English
write
class?
Yeah. What is this?
Nice, right.
Okay, it's the second box down on this. We didn't start with the first one. We started with the second one. So you're gonna find a quotation in that section that you just read from Ezra Klein, and you are going to just do this part. You don't need to copy down the whole quotation. You are just going to write down relevant information from Ezra Klein using the quote paraphrase mode method. And ultimately, you're wanting to speak to this synthesis question I have at the top of the page. What is the most important effect media polarization will have on our country? So find something in his little article here that speaks to that issue and try to write it using the quote paraphrase method. Again, you don't have to write out the whole quote like I did up here. I only did this to demonstrate. You just need to write this part, but for your own sake. But for your own. Okay, when you've got your sentence, go back to the sources for March 2nd and 3rd and find the one that says the antidote to fake news is to nourish our epistemic well-being. Yeah, that's a fun title. Now I need to make sure. It's our ways of knowing.
If I'm
Yeah,
ending
okay, good.
with a quote, the quote just ends with a period.
Oh, but you already said his name, so you've already done what you need to do for the citation, so period inside.
Oh.
So epistemic is related to knowledge. It's like, it's our ways of knowing, EPIST.
Find it, that's why I'm trying to spell it.
It's not on that.
It is.
Oh, it's the third one.
So go back to that. It's the next one there.
Yes. Okay, so is everyone done with their sentence now? We're moving on to this next article. It's called "The Antidote to Fake News is to Nourish Our Epistemic Well-Being." So epistemic is just like, it's a philosophy word that is like, it means our ways of knowing. So basically it is saying we need to nourish all the tools that we have to know something, our fact gathering tools. The article is not as hard as the headline, I don't think.
Yeah, the rest of it's.
Yeah, the rest of it's really straightforward.
About if we were actually a country full of democracy, like with all these sources, like.
If we're still a democracy, yeah. That'd be fun. It is, it's all of them put together, but that's what English class is. That's why English is so good. Oh, really? I didn't know that. I'm glad you did this time. Yeah. All right. This is quite a long article. I'm going to give you about 5 minutes, get as far as you can in the article. So just reading about our epistemic well-being for 5 minutes. Like I said, the article is not as dense as the headline.
Everything we discussed, somehow like something related to it will like show up in my life. It's not hard work. Next thing I was reading like Spanish. Who did we? There's something she had. We were like, we figure out how to stop the news from being spread around. And now we're like reading about it. Like I'm like, this is so
I
weird.
swear we didn't plan it.
Every time it happens. It's not.
That's great. okay, I'm gonna cut you off. I want you to do the same thing now on that goldenrod piece of paper. This will be the third source on there. So you're gonna find a quote. This time, try to find one that has something to do with the Ezra Klein quote. You're kind of trying to put these two in conversation with each other. So see if you can find a quote from this Psyche article. I don't know if they pronounce it psych or psyche. This Psyche article, and find a quote that has something to do with what you wrote about Klein, and see if you can use that same method of paraphrasing quoting. I hope that makes sense. Yes.
I feel like I'm doing this wrong. Like, am I like doing the paraphrasing right?
Yeah, it looks like it. Media
Okay.
players would convey more sympathy.
Because I'm doing it more like responding like directly to the question.
Yeah. Yes, I think that works. I mean, it didn't have to be a direct response to that because it could be how you shape your
Yeah.
answers, but it works really well.
Okay.
Yeah, one thing I will say is to kind of vary things up. Try for the next one. I don't know, we'll get time to do
Yeah.
a next one, but try to vary the order. Like, don't always have the
Yeah,
quote at the very end.
Okay.
Yep. You guys have written the second sentence now. Raise your hand. Okay. Okay, last thing we're gonna do. I think this will be, and then Colin, I want my mind. I'm gonna give you a line piece of paper for this. It'll be easier. Okay, we're gonna write a paragraph that you will find. All right, so here's the deal. I think sometimes we get stuck in a pattern as beginning writers where we devote one paragraph to each source. So we get, let's say your teacher says you need 5 sources for this paper. That would mean you basically have 5 body paragraphs, and in each paragraph you describe a different source, right? But we want to try to make our writing flow a little bit better by, instead of setting the sources up against each other in that way, trying to make the source have conversations within a paragraph. So I read one more source than you last class period. So I've got 3 sources in this paragraph, but I want to show you what it looks like. So I say the relationship of the polarization in the news media and the polarization of our opinions is self-perpetuating. As our interactions with the media become more narrowed, our attitudes towards each other become more divided, leading us to even more biased news sources that promote our previously held views. With Democrats reading from a number of sources and Republicans increasingly expressing distrust in those sources, the chance that Republicans and Democrats will ever find commonalities decreases. This guy's name was Jerkowitz, which I just think is the best name. Though Kenneth Boyd claims, that's the epistemology guy, though Kenneth Boyd claims that we can audit our epistemic habits, Ezra Klein is more pessimistic, arguing that in this extreme political mindset, even when we view media from our political opponents, we develop a deeper certainty in the rightness of our cause. Our consumption of media is therefore only furthering the differences between people. As we read from different media sources, we might be willing to hear other opinions, but we're less inclined to really listen. So all of that is to say, I've used this paraphrase quote method. There we go. To kind of show how the different sources are in conversation with each other, metaphorically speaking.
Maybe just me, but it seems like sometimes the paraphrasing quote combo kind of like can make the source, or it almost seems like it's ridicule, like I'm trying to explain it, but like it seems like sometimes it can make it look like you're almost like ridiculing the source, like,
Yeah.
oh, the source said it was good, or kind of stuff like,
Like they seem like scare quote.
yeah, I don't know.
Yeah. I could see that. I could see that. This one right here though looks less like a ridicule, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And I think that's what I was going with, because ultimately I agree with him, so I'm giving him more time. So maybe that's okay sometimes to look like because you kind of want to show who you're critical of too. So that could be okay. Not always. Maybe I do it too much in this paragraph. Yeah. Okay, I want you to try. I know we only have 7 minutes left. I want you to try to write your own paragraph about this topic now. So it's going to have to be short. You're just going to use the 2 sources, but you've already done most of the work by writing your sentence. I'm sorry, I can share the screen so that you can see that. when you're done with your paragraph, we're done for today. I don't need the goldenrod sheet. Save that for next time. I do want the paragraph. So put your name on the top and then go put it into the drawer for me.